What happens when grace collides with chaos? When the polish of Hollywood calm meets the unpredictable pulse of live television? Moments like that don't happen often, but when they do, they stay with people. They replay the moment, argue about it online, and dissect every second like it's a scene from a movie. That's exactly what happened the morning Olivia Wilde sat across from Joy Behar on The View. What started as a routine press stop turned into something unforgettable. It wasn't just another interview. It was a clash of worlds. The day had begun like any other episode. Warm lights, an eager studio audience, coffee cups on the desk, and that familiar mix of laughter and anticipation. Olivia walked in poised and calm, dressed in a navy suit that caught the light just right. She smiled graciously as the host welcomed her, ready to talk about her new film, a project people were already calling her artistic return. There was no hint of what was about to unfold. Joy Behar leaned forward, that trademark grin on her face, eyes glinting with curiosity. "So, Olivia," she began casually, her tone playful but pointed, "you've been through quite a lot these past few years. The movie drama, the breakups, all the headlines. How do you even keep it together?" The audience chuckled, sensing something sharp in the question. Olivia's smile stayed in place, but if you look closely, it faltered just a fraction. "I focus on my work," she said, calm but clipped. "When you pour your energy into something meaningful, the noise tends to fade." It was a measured answer, one that hinted at boundaries. But Joy wasn't finished. "Right, but come on," she continued, waving a hand as if brushing the air. "You can't just ignore all that. You had tabloids saying every crazy thing imaginable. The custody drama, the stories with your ex. That wasn't just noise, was it?" The air thickened. A few gasps rippled through the crowd. Even the other hosts shifted in their seats. Olivia's jaw tightened. You could almost see the internal shift, composure hardening into quiet defiance. She looked at Sunny Hostin for a beat, maybe searching for an ally, then turned back to Joy. "I think it's pretty unfair," she said, her tone firm but calm, "to reduce a woman's life to gossip headlines, especially when that same energy isn't given to men in this industry." Joy arched an eyebrow, smiling like someone who'd been in this arena far too long. "Oh, come on, honey. We go after the guys too. You think I go easy on them?" The tension was electric now. Whoopi Goldberg cleared her throat, sensing the storm brewing, but before she could shift the topic, Joy leaned in again. "Let's be honest," she said, smirking. "If you didn't want people talking, maybe you shouldn't have dated another actor right after all that drama." The studio froze. The laughter stopped. You could feel the moment break. One of those invisible lines crossed right in front of millions of viewers. Olivia blinked once, slowly, then met Joy's gaze. Her voice dropped to a calm, almost whisper-like tone, but there was steel underneath it. "You know what's interesting, Joy?" she said. "You talk about women's empowerment, about respecting boundaries, and yet here you are turning a woman's private life into entertainment." The audience murmured. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. Joy chuckled awkwardly. "Oh, lighten up, Olivia. This is The View. We talk about real life here." Olivia leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs, her smile razor sharp. "No," she said. "You talk about other people's lives. You don't talk about the cost of being dissected. You don't talk about what it's like when your children have to read lies written by people who've never even met their mother." That landed. You could see the discomfort ripple across the table. Whoopi looked torn between stepping in and letting it play out. Sunny's eyes darted from one woman to the other. Even the crowd seemed unsure whether to clap or stay silent. "I came here to talk about my film," Olivia continued, her voice growing stronger. "Something I worked hard on. But instead, I'm being asked to defend my personal life on national television. That's not journalism. That's voyeurism." This time the applause came, hesitant at first, then louder, building into something undeniable. Joy's posture stiffened. She gave a small, forced laugh. "Okay, you're feisty today." "I'm honest today," Olivia replied. "Maybe that's what makes people uncomfortable." The studio went silent for a heartbeat before another wave of applause broke through. The producers, caught off guard, scrambled behind the cameras, gesturing wildly. But this was live television. There was no cutting away from it. Sonny Hostin tried to steady the tone. Olivia, I actually appreciate what you're saying, she said gently. Women in the public eye are held to a different standard. I've felt that too. Olivia nodded, grateful, but still visibly burning with emotion. Joy jumped back in, her voice tight but playful. Look, I wasn't attacking you. I was just saying what people are thinking. And that, Olivia shot back instantly, is the problem. We excuse cruelty by calling it curiosity. This time the applause was immediate and loud. The crowd was with her. Joy smiled through it, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. The chemistry had shifted completely. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was a reckoning. Olivia took a slow breath. You can be funny, Joy, she said evenly, without being cruel. That single sentence detonated like a thunderclap. The audience gasped. A few people even clapped mid-gasp, and Joy looked genuinely caught off guard. For the first time, she had no ready comeback. Whoopi raised her hands and tried to lighten the mood. All right, ladies, she said, half joking. Let's take a break before we start throwing coffee mugs. The crowd laughed nervously, but the air didn't clear. Olivia sat still, composed but blazing with conviction, while Joy turned slightly away, muttering something under her breath. When the cameras cut to commercial, you could almost feel the collective exhale. But this wasn't over. Behind the scenes, producers whispered frantically into headsets. Crew members pretended to stay busy, though every eye darted toward the guest table. Olivia stayed perfectly still, sipping water like nothing had happened. Joy laughed with a stage hand, that kind of forced laugh people use when they're trying to convince everyone they're fine. When the red light blinked again, signaling the cameras were live, the tension was so thick it almost buzzed. Whoopi straightened her cue cards, her tone deliberately calm. We're back, she said. Things got a little heated before the break. But hey, that's the view. Strong women, strong opinions. She turned to Olivia. Now tell us about this new film. It's clearly something you're passionate about. Olivia nodded slowly, exhaling. It is, she said. It's about resilience. About a woman trying to reclaim her voice after being silenced by the world around her. The irony hung in the air. Everyone felt it. Joy smirked, muttering into her mic. Sounds familiar. The audience laughed awkwardly. Olivia turned her gaze toward her, calm but unflinching. You'd be surprised, she said softly, how many people think they're helping women find their voice, while really just talking over them. Gasps again. Sonny's eyes widened slightly. Sarah Haynes pressed her lips together. Joy opened her mouth to respond but faltered. Joy finally forced a grin. Okay, I see what's happening here, she said. You're turning this into a TED Talk. I'm just telling the truth, Olivia replied. Funny how honesty makes people uncomfortable. The applause came again, louder, more confident this time. Even some of the co-hosts clapped. Olivia leaned forward, her voice steady, her composure restored. Women are told to smile through disrespect, she said, to laugh off invasive questions. But that's not strength, that's performance. And I'm tired of performing. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but power. You could feel the shift in the room. Even Joy looked momentarily unsure. I wasn't trying to disrespect you, Joy said after a pause. We joke here. We tease. That's part of the show. Olivia's gaze didn't waver. There's a difference between teasing and belittling. And when women call that out, they get labeled as emotional or difficult. I'm just tired of pretending that's normal. The audience erupted into applause. This time, full and sustained. Some even stood. Joy sighed, forcing a smile. Well, I guess I'm the villain today. Olivia shook her head gently. You're not the villain, Joy. You're just saying what too many people think, that a woman's worth is tied to how well she tolerates being disrespected. Even Whoopi nodded slightly, her expression somewhere between weary and impressed. The studio was silent except for the sound of applause fading into murmurs. It was rare to see someone push back so gracefully, so fearlessly, and live on air. The balance of power had shifted. Olivia wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was voicing something deeper, something collective. And that was only the first half of what would become one of the most viral moments in talk show history. Because when they came back from the next commercial break, the heat would rise even high. When the interview ended, the conversation didn't. Within minutes, social media had exploded into a frenzy of opinions, reactions, and replayed clips dissected from every possible angle. The video was uploaded to YouTube by the network, and within hours it had racked up hundreds of thousands of views. Comment sections filled with debates that ranged from praise to criticism, and every second of the exchange was analyzed frame by frame. People pointed out Olivia's tone, her posture, the way she paused before answering. Some saw quiet strength, others called it defiance. But no matter which side they took, one thing was undeniable. The moment had struck a nerve. News outlets jumped on it almost instantly. Entertainment blogs ran with headlines like, "Olivia Wilde shuts down Joy Behar," and "The View's tense moment leaves audience divided." Morning talk shows spent the next day replaying clips, hosts weighing in on who was right and who crossed the line. The segment had transcended the usual celebrity interview. It became a cultural moment, a mirror reflecting the way women in power are often expected to behave, and the backlash that comes when they don't fit neatly into that expectation. In the days that followed, Olivia stayed quiet. No tweets, no statements, no follow-up interviews. It was as if she understood that silence, in that moment, spoke louder than any clarification could. And in my opinion, that was one of the smartest moves she could have made. Sometimes not responding allows the story to breathe, and more importantly, allows people to notice the bigger picture. Meanwhile, Joy Behar faced her own wave of scrutiny. Viewers who'd watched The View for years said they'd never seen her rattled like that. Others defended her, saying she was just doing her job, asking the hard questions that others avoided. But a surprising number of fans sided with Olivia, calling her composure masterclass level. They admired how she didn't let emotion take over, how she answered each question with honesty without ever losing control. Behind the scenes, producers reportedly debated whether to keep the full segment available online. Some felt it made the show look confrontational, while others argued it showcased exactly what made live television compelling: unpredictability. In the end, they left it up, and that decision alone turned what could have been a forgotten, awkward interview into one of the most rewatched talk show moments of the year. Weeks passed, but the conversation refused to die down. Think pieces appeared in major outlets analyzing the dynamic between the two women, exploring how public expectations of female behavior play out under scrutiny. Writers compared the moment to other tense on-air exchanges throughout history, drawing parallels to times when actors or directors had to defend their integrity against public misperception. But none seemed to resonate the way this one did. There was something raw about it, something that couldn't be scripted. Then came the inevitable response from Hollywood. Other celebrities quietly voiced their support. A well-known actress commented under a fan post saying, "She handled that with more grace than most could." A director who had worked with Olivia years earlier tweeted, "People forget she's always been tougher than she looks." Little by little, the narrative shifted. What had started as a controversy began to look more like a triumph of self-control and authenticity. And this is where things took an interesting turn. When Olivia finally broke her silence weeks later, she didn't do it through a press release or a carefully curated social media post. Instead, she mentioned it briefly during an interview at a film festival Q&A session. When asked how she deals with tough interviews, she smiled and said, "You tell the truth and then you let it live its life. People will say what they say. You just stay steady." That one line summed up everything people admired about her in that moment: measured, grounded, unbothered. The clip of her answer went viral, just like the original interview had. Fans called it poetic, almost full circle. Critics praised her professionalism, noting how she'd turned what could have been a PR disaster into a defining character moment. And honestly, watching how it all unfolded, it was hard not to agree. There's a certain kind of strength in refusing to be reactive, in letting calmness speak louder than defensiveness. Olivia had mastered that. Joy Behar, on the other hand, addressed it on The View weeks later. She didn't apologize directly, but she did acknowledge that sometimes interviews go places you don't expect. Her co-host nodded, adding that live television has a way of revealing things no one plans for. It was a subtle way of closing the chapter, but viewers noticed the tone. It wasn't dismissive, it was reflective. And maybe that's what made it resonate even more. For months afterward, journalists and media analysts continued to reference that interview as an example of authenticity in celebrity culture. It wasn't polished, it wasn't rehearsed, it was human. And that's something audiences are starving for, especially in an era where most interviews feel sanitized, with every answer pre-approved by a publicist. What happened that day reminded people that real conversation, uncomfortable as it may be, still matters. Career-wise, the aftermath played out in surprising ways. Olivia's film, which had been quietly making rounds at indie festivals, suddenly saw a spike in interest. Streaming services reached out to secure distribution rights. The interview had inadvertently amplified her project, not because of the controversy, but because it reminded people of her artistry and depth. She became a symbol of poise under pressure, and her next few public appearances were met with overwhelming support. Joy's reputation, meanwhile, remained intact. If anything, the moment reminded viewers of what's always made her compelling. She asks what others won't. Love her or not, that fearlessness is part of her DNA as a host. The difference now was that audiences saw the cost of that boldness in real time. The exchange with Olivia showed that sometimes, when two strong personalities meet, sparks are inevitable, and maybe that's exactly what makes it interesting to watch. Over time, the frenzy faded. The headlines disappeared, the online debates slowed down, but the impact lingered. That one morning became a quiet reference point for how modern fame works, how a few unscripted minutes can reshape public perception in ways no marketing campaign ever could. And when people look back at that era of celebrity culture, that interview will likely stand out as one of those rare instances where honesty, tension, and composure collided in front of millions, leaving behind something undeniably real. Even now, if you search for that clip online, the comments section keeps growing. Some people still argue about who was right, while others just express a renewed buzz. Not because of scandal or gossip, but because people were actually watching it, really watching it. Critics praised its emotional honesty, calling it a story told with unflinching empathy. And that felt poetic, considering what she'd lived through on live television. At the Spirit Awards, where independent filmmakers gather every year to celebrate work outside the Hollywood machine, Olivia took the stage to present an award. The audience stood as she walked out, some out of admiration, others out of respect for how she'd handled herself. She didn't mention the interview directly, but she didn't have to. Her speech about creative integrity and resilience carried the quiet weight of experience. "We tell stories," she said, "because they remind us we're not alone when the world gets loud." The room went still. For a moment, you could sense that everyone knew exactly what she meant. Back at The View, things carried on as usual. New guests came and went, new discussions filled the air, and Joy Behar continued doing what she'd always done, asking sharp questions and refusing to pretend otherwise. Yet something subtle had changed in her tone. There was a little more space between her words, a softness that came from reflection rather than retreat. On one episode, she even laughed about the way certain interviews take on a life of their own, and co-hosts joked that at least she never bored anyone. The audience laughed, but the comment held an undercurrent of truth. Sometimes the most uncomfortable conversations are the ones that end up teaching you the most. In the entertainment press, that single episode of The View started being referenced in discussions about the evolution of celebrity interviews. Writers noted that audiences no longer wanted polished PR answers. They wanted humanity. They wanted the cracks, the pauses, the moments where people revealed something real without meaning to. What had once been considered awkward television was now being studied as authenticity. Public relations experts even used the Olivia moment as an example of how staying composed under pressure could turn a potential controversy into an image-building triumph. Workshops for media training began referencing it, highlighting how tone and silence can communicate strength more effectively than defensiveness. Ironically, the very moment that could have hurt her reputation became a masterclass in how to survive one. For Olivia herself, the months following were transformative. Industry insiders said she became more selective with interviews, focusing on long-form conversations rather than soundbite-driven shows. When she appeared on late-night television again, She chose hosts known for empathy and curiosity rather than confrontation. The result was a subtle reintroduction, a chance for audiences to see her not as the woman who clashed on live TV, but as an artist reclaiming her own rhythm. One of her later interviews stood out. Sitting across from a respected journalist known for in-depth profiles, she was asked what she'd learned from being so publicly dissected. Olivia thought for a long moment before answering. "I learned that perception changes every minute, but character doesn't. You can't control the noise, but you can control your part in it." That quote was shared thousands of times, especially by young women who saw in her a reminder that grace isn't weakness, it's endurance. Meanwhile, Joy received her own wave of renewed respect. For decades, she'd been one of the few daytime hosts who could make or break an interview with a single question. The Olivia exchange reminded viewers that her bluntness wasn't cruelty, it was conviction. She even joked in a later segment that, "If people stop talking after I ask a question, I must be doing something right." The audience roared with laughter, and for a moment, it felt like everyone had made peace with what happened. As time went on, their brief collision on live TV took on almost mythic proportions in the media world. It was compared to moments like David Letterman's tense interviews with Madonna or Barbara Walters' emotionally charged sit-downs in the early 2000s. But the difference here was tone. This wasn't shock value, it was quiet power. Two women navigating the thin line between truth and performance, each representing something larger than themselves. By summer, the noise had faded, replaced by a kind of reverent nostalgia. Clips of the interview resurfaced now and then, usually attached to think pieces about authenticity or the new age of transparency in Hollywood. Younger creators on social media even began editing the footage into motivational reels, overlaying Olivia's calm responses with instrumental music and captions like, "Stay calm, stay centered." It was strange, almost surreal, to see what began as tension transform into inspiration. Behind the curtain, though, people who'd worked on that episode of The View still remembered the energy in the studio that day. One producer later described it in an interview as a masterclass in restraint. She said that when the cameras cut, everyone in the control room exhaled at once, realizing they'd just captured something that would outlive the episode's broadcast. "You don't get moments like that often," she said. "It wasn't a meltdown. It was clarity in Hollywood circles. That clarity started influencing how future interviews were handled. Publicists began coaching their clients differently, not to avoid difficult questions, but to approach them with stillness. They cited Olivia's moment as proof that poise disarms more effectively than argument. The industry had quietly learned something from what unfolded that morning. Real composure can't be manufactured. Olivia's next directorial project went into development quietly. Insiders said the tone of her new work reflected the introspection she'd gained. Themes of voice, control, and public perception woven through its story. When she was asked at a festival panel whether her previous media experience influenced her art, she smiled and replied, "Everything that teaches you to listen more carefully changes your art." It wasn't about the past anymore. It was about growth. For Joy, that period marked a reflective chapter as well. She began hosting occasional behind-the-scenes specials where she discussed the evolution of daytime television, how it had shifted from light entertainment to cultural battleground. During one of those specials, she spoke candidly about how television is at its best when it's alive, when it breathes, when it surprises you. Without naming names, everyone knew she was referring to that unforgettable morning. Years later, when both women crossed paths again at a major award show, the cameras caught a brief but telling moment. Olivia was walking the red carpet, poised as ever, when Joy appeared behind her, smiling warmly. They exchanged a nod, small, subtle, but full of unspoken understanding. No tension, no awkwardness, just two professionals acknowledging a shared history that had, in its own way, shaped them both. The photo of that moment spread quickly online. Fans called it closure, journalists called it grace, and honestly, it was both. Because sometimes resolution doesn't need words, it just needs time. Looking back now, that single interview has become almost folklore in the television world. It's a reminder of how authenticity, when it breaks through the noise, changes everything it touches. For audiences, it was proof that celebrities are not characters. They're people navigating impossible scrutiny in real time. For hosts and journalists, it was a lesson in the delicate balance between curiosity and compassion. And for both Olivia and Joy, it was a turning point that redefined how they were seen, not just as entertainer and interviewer, but as women who dared to be unguarded on camera. Maybe that's why it still resonates, because deep down, we all recognize ourselves in that exchange. The moment you're pushed, the moment you choose whether to react or rise above. Olivia chose calm. Joy chose honesty. Both choices had consequences, but both led to growth. The years moved on. New stories replaced the old. New headlines demanded attention, but that moment stayed. Quietly like a memory that still hums beneath the surface. And every now and then, when clips of it reappear online, people still comment, "This was real. This was human." That's the lasting power of truth. It doesn't fade with time. It settles in, waits, and reminds us that even in the loudest rooms, dignity has its own kind of volume.